we start with the very basic. I want to have your name, where you were born, and when you were born.
Okay, my name is Bob Sherlock. Actually, I go by Bob. I was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 18th, 1926.
Now, you wound up in the Marine Corps looking for a blue uniform. How did you happen to get into the Marine Corps?
It's a family tradition, actually. My father was a seagoing Marine during World War I, and so I grew up hearing Marine Corps. Uniform didn't mean anything, I just wanted to be a Marine. And then during World War II, he had to write to the Commandant of the Marine Corps for an age waiver, and back in he went at 42 years of age. And so I had to follow him. That's all there was to it. And that was my greatest ambition, to try to catch up with him. I never did grade-wise catch up with him, but I tried.
You were in high school, you had turned out a pretty famous classmate, didn't you?
Yeah, Dick Van Dyke, yeah. Yeah, I went to school with Dick Van Dyke. I wasn't buddy-buddy with him, but we knew each other, and we talked. My dad at that time was a recruiting sergeant. Dick was very interested in radio, so when Dad would have to get on the radio and make a recruiting talk, Dick was always down at the local radio station, so that's how I got to know him better. So I'd see him down at the radio station there all the time, and see him in school, and we'd talk. When I left school, my sophomore year, he signed my yearbook, and about 10 years ago we decided, no, I guess about 14 years ago, we decided, or I did, that Colorado was getting too crowded, and I moved back to Illinois for 3 years. And while I was back there, Dick showed up in town for a reunion that he had there, and I took my yearbook, and I said, Dick, sign this for me. And it's amazing the difference between his signature when he was in high school and his signature that he now uses on everything that he signs. But he got a kick out of me showing up with that yearbook.
Did he ever go in the service at that time? Or?
Dick left about the same time I did, went in the Air Force.
Okay, so your father wasn't able to recruit him into the Marines?
No. No, he wanted more, I think he wanted more in the line of entertainment and so forth.
But I think it worked out pretty well for him.
Very well, very well. He's really a nice guy. When he showed up for the big reunion they had for that year at high school reunion, he showed up in town with a rented car. He flew in, no entourage at all. He just picked up a car over to Indianapolis, drove in, and checked into the hotel and became one of the people again. So he met up with his old buddies, and they had a good time. I enlisted on the 13th of September 1943, but I wasn't called up until in December because it only takes so many 17-year-olds at a time. And the Marine Corps was flooded with 17-year-olds about that time, and so I had to wait until they had an allowance of so many people who could go on to boot camp.
Okay, where'd you go to boot camp?
Yeah, out of California, San Diego, Marine Corps recruit depot there.
Bob, one of the things I think is interesting is who was the recruiting sergeant that enlisted you?
The recruiting sergeant was my father. When he went back in, of course, he had to go back through boot camp again after 20-some years of being, or I mean 40-some years being out. And they sent him out to San Diego this time rather than Parris Island. And when he came back home, I didn't know it, but when he enlisted, they assigned him to recruiting duty. And So by some strange chance, I was very fortunate to go down and talk to my father, have him sign my papers. It was sort of strange sitting there with everybody else talking like crazy to the recruiters, and I'm sitting there just watching him fill out all the forms, and all he said is, "Here, sign it," and I did. And all once I was starting to become a Marine.
That's a neat experience, that's great. So how long did it take you? Was it quite a while, you said, just waiting to actually?
About 2.5 months I had to wait before I went in December. Then we went out to San Diego, the latter part of December, and we had 7 weeks of boot camp. They just shortened it down from 13 weeks to 7 weeks at that time.
Tell a little story about Bob. 2 or 3 years ago, we were at a little militaria show, and Bob got so happy because he found a guy wearing a Marine t-shirt and hat who was shorter and heavier than he.
That's the truth. No, I was always a feather merchant in the unit, that we call feather merchant. There was always the last 3 of us who were the shortest people. And they wrote us a lot because when they turned the column around and you were leading the column, we couldn't step out of we had to run to keep up with the big tall guys, you know. No, I'm lucky. The other 2 feather merchants in boot camp all never made it back home. One was killed up in Eagle, and one was killed in Okinawa. When we went into boot camp, they had a sea bag at the head of each of our cots, and in the sea bag were 2 sets of dungarees, our utility uniform, and which were pretty much the same size for everybody, and an overcoat.
And how tall were you at the time?
And at that time, I was a whole 5'5". That was the minimum amount that you could be to be a Marine, and I happened to just hit 5'5". And that overcoat was made for a big person. So the idea was you take it out and you trade it amongst yourselves until everybody was fitted with it. We couldn't find anybody big enough to fit the one I had. So I had to wear it. And the first time I wore it, at night they decided they were going to entertain us. We were going to go out to an outdoor movie. In January in California by the ocean, it gets pretty nippy. So everybody fell out in their overcoats. And my hands, you could not see. The coat goes over the top of my hands. The bottom of the coat's dragging on the deck. I'm standing in ranks, and the DI comes down through there, and he stops dead. And he looks at me, and he said, "Sherlock, where in the hell did you get that?" And I told him, "It was issued to me, sir." And somebody snickered in the back rank, and he drew himself up and looked around, and he says, "Don't laugh at it, it's not funny, it's pathetic." You know, I turned around. I never did get rid of that overcoat. I mean, I couldn't get rid of it by finding it. Of course, we went to the Pacific right away, so I didn't need it. So it was at the bottom of my sea bag, and the last time I saw that sea bag, it was sitting out in a cane field in Saipan, so no great loss. When we had that reunion 20 years later here, somebody asked me, "Where's your overcoat?" You know? No,
Now, they pass it out, it's yours.
well, of course, they had a hell of a time fitting me anyway, because, I mean, I'm so damn short, and they expect tall people. So everything had to be cut off and fitted, and I used to get so tickled when I used to think about it. Well, the overcoat did come in handy. When we went to the rifle range, things loosened up, and they let us go through we never could go through PX by ourselves. You had to go through in formation. And in the Marine Corps, when you go through boot camp, you don't go out the gate until after you're finally done. And I saw ice cream. So I go running through there. You ran through there and grabbed what you needed. And I grabbed a pint of ice cream. And I'm in the rear rank as usual. Of course, I'm the shortest one. And we marched back to our barracks. And I'm sitting in the back with that ice cream and this over that overcoat over there, and I'm eating ice cream in ranks. I thought I got away with it. But going overseas, our DI had finally got rid of being a DI. He was back in Fleet Marine Force where he wanted to be. And we're sitting on the hatch of this Liberty ship. And he said, you know, Sherlock, he said, I gave you a hard time. And as you did, I didn't think you gave me any more trouble than anybody else. And he said, no. He said, I saw you eating that ice cream. And he said, I figured if you had nerve enough to do that, I'd let it go. And he said, besides, I've been writing your dad. And I said, what? And he said, well, your dad wrote to me because I want to know who this Staff Sergeant Russell Sherlock was. Is that your brother or what? And so I'm curious, and I wrote, and they decided they both had served on the Utah at different times. So they wrote all through the war to each other. But Dad had written to him while I was in boot camp. He said, write him, make a Marine out of him because I want him back. And from there we went to Camp Elliott to infantry training, and from infantry training right away overseas. And so I was out of the States by the end of May.
Did your training prepare you for what you actually encountered?
I don't think you can train prepare for what you run into. You learn discipline, you learn to do your job when you're scared to death. But for what you see and all, you just have to do it. That's all there is to it. I mean, I don't know, it just it's a matter of pride, a matter you don't want to be pegged as somebody who doesn't do their job and so forth because you stand up and go. When they yell, let's go, you stand up and do it. It's not because you're brave or anything else, you just do it because you're the discipline and the self-respect.
Your instructors in training, were they combat veterans or were they pretty much training specialists?
Most of the people that I had for training through infantry training were people from Guadalcanal, and they were riflemen, they were infantry, and they taught us what they knew. But as I say, when it comes right down to it, they can teach you the basics, but the rest of it you have to learn.
And you said you were only in basic for about 7 weeks. That was a pretty fast course.
We had 7 weeks of boot camp and about 7 weeks of infantry training, and then we were board ship. Yeah, we didn't waste any time. I learned a lot from some really fine people. I think that's the thing that I appreciate more than anything else, is the people I met. And I've often thought that these sergeants were awful, patient people. You know, they were raising teenagers. They were probably about 22, 23 years old, and here they've got all these 17, 18, 19-year-olds who were damn good Marines, but once in a while they would fall back into the teenage, you know, and do some strange things. And how the hell they raised those kids, I don't know, but as a fighting unit, they were marvelous. Well, strangely enough, we spent about a third of our time at the rifle range. Marine Corps is hell on rifle, and that was good days too. They paid you $5 if you shot expert. They paid you $3 a month extra if you paid shot sharpshooter. So when you're making $50 a month, that $5 is pretty good pay to have. I missed it when we went back for the Korean thing. They didn't do it any longer. But no, we spent a lot of time at the rifle range. And then most of our infantry training, too, was a lot of live fire. We burned a lot of ammunition.
So you find yourself on a troop ship then?
On a troop ship. That was my first experience with the Navy. And it was sort of, really wasn't, because all they had was Navy gun crew aboard ship. It was a merchant ship, the Victory ship, and they took us out to Pearl Harbor, and we laid over Pearl Harbor about 2 weeks. I got one Liberty in Pearl. And from there we went over to Maui and spent another week, and then we went back aboard ship, and from there on out to Saipan and Tinian then.
What was your unit?
Beg pardon?
Oh, what Marine division were you in?
I started out with the 24th Marines, 4th Marine Division as a replacement. When Tinian was secured, they pulled all of our replacement battalion out. They had split us between the 2nd and the 4th Marine Divisions. And I guess a decision was made that the 2nd Marine Division would stay there and mop up the islands. 4th would go back to Maui, refit, and of course be ready to go on to Iwo. I always considered myself very lucky that they pulled me out of the 4th Division and sent me to the 2nd Division, so I missed Iwo Jima that way. Had a lot of fun running around the mountains for a while, but
What was it like when you got to Tinian? Where did you land there?
we landed on the 2nd day after the assault. We came ashore. Very peaceful. I mean, they were about a mile inshore. So we landed without any problems and formed up, and they assigned us as replacements to wherever we were supposed to go. And there was a sergeant down there to call off the names from each company or each battalion, and I ended up in the 3rd Battalion, 24th Marines at that time. And from there we started the walk across Tinian. And Tinian was a series of steps. Basically, you'd have a level area for a while, and then there'd be cliffs. You have to go over the cliffs, and then you go on and you'd have more flat ground until you finally walked all the way across the island. So it was pretty wide open there. It was completely different than Saipan. We had support with tanks on Tinian where we didn't have on Saipan. Tanks are fine, but they draw an awful lot of fire.
Where was it? I know you told me this story, but where was it that you just joined a unit and the sergeant came by and asked if you were related to your father?
Oh.
It turned out.
This was sort of a strange thing. The first night after I joined up with L Company 34th, 24th Marines, there was this sort of little shrunken, brown down guy, I mean, older than anybody else up there, and he came up and I'm sitting in the foxhole, and he said, "Are you Sherlock?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You know, I've been in this Marine Corps now for 28 years, and he said, I've only ran across the name of Sherlock one other time before." And he said, "You any relation to Russ Sherlock?" And I said, "Yeah, that's my dad." And he said, "Well, where the hell is old Russ?" And I said, "Well, he's back in the Corps again." I said, "He's a staff sergeant doing recruiting duty." And he said, "Well, for crying out loud." And he said, well, he gave me his name, and I'm sorry I have forgotten that name now. He said, "I'm Regimental Sergeant Major." And he said, "I served with Russ on this Utah, the battleship Utah during World War I in the Marine Detachment." And he said, "I was just curious enough when I was reading the roster to see if you were any relation at all to Russ Sherlock." And I said, "Yeah, that's my dad."
So you go all the way over there and run into somebody.
Yeah.
That's neat. What were the conditions like? You talked about just walking across Tinian. What kind of resistance did you run into?
I can remember the first day after we formed up and we fell into reserve. The other 2 companies were on the line. And Love Company followed along in reserve. The thing that amazed me was the noise. I've never have forgotten the noise. I mean, the area just seems to be alive all the time. You hear the whispering or you hear the snapping around, and of course mortar fire and so forth. It's pretty noisy. But we probably went 2 hours before we filled in, went up on the line itself. And the skirmish line basically was used a lot on Tinian because it was wide open. And you could look on each way on the side of it, and you could see Marines walking along. I mean, they're scattered. Nobody's close, but it's a raggedy line moving forward all the time. And you're going through the worst part were the cane fields, because you never knew what was in those cane fields. And a lot of them had been set on fire, and cane was laying down every which way and dirty as the devil. You just had to fight your way through the cane. You wanted to stay out of the roads because those were usually set up as fields of fire for the Japanese, and so we tried to stay in the rougher part that way. And we just kept going, and when part of the line would hit something, we'd hold up until they cleared it, then the line would go forward again, and it was just a long, slow walk. And when you came to the cliffs, then you had to break up and get over the cliffs, clean the caves, start over again in the next level elevation. We did that, I think, for about 8 days before we got to the shore on the opposite side of the island, and that was it.
So the Japanese were in the caves too.
Oh yes, they had fortified the caves along there, and we had to clean those out.
What'd you have to do there? You had to be awfully careful anywhere you went then.
I'm sorry.
You had to be so careful when you got close to these things, didn't you?
Yeah, I was lucky. Every place I ever went, there was always some so-called older Marines, usually about a year older than you were, so they weren't very old, but they had been through it, so they knew what they were doing, and they looked after you. They taught you how to do things and how to clean, and you learn real quick, like. But it worked as a team. It was a constant teamwork all the time.
You mentioned going into the unit, you were a replacement.
Yeah.
In the division, and you mentioned that there were old Marines who would kind of take you under your wing. Were there some guys who were wary about a replacement, whether they could count on a replacement, somebody that was just coming out of boot camp and training?
You had to prove yourself. They were there, would show you things, but you weren't really on a friendly basis until they finally accepted you. And really, I mean, how be a replacement coming in when things are not happening, I mean by shooting and so forth, I don't know, but I mean, once that you showed that you could do and would do what you're supposed to do, they accepted you. I remember after one firefight, Kester yelled over to Malone, "Sherlock's okay, he can shoot." And from then on, I was on the inside. But up until that time, I was just sort of on the fringe. So it just takes time. Usually the guy who does all the heavy talking and all, I'm going to do this and that, I don't want him around. I don't trust him. If I'm going to pick people, I'll take the quieter ones.
That's great. I'm glad you asked that question.
The reason I asked that is because not necessarily Marines, but other guys that we've talked to, other theaters of war, had the same experience. Mm-hmm. And some of them actually were very, very wary and didn't want to be around them because they weren't sure that they were going to last long.
Yeah.
Some of the 8th Air Force guys, the B-17
Yeah.
crews, they said that you'd come in and there'd be a new crew and they'd go out on their first flight and they'd never come back.
Yeah.
So you didn't want to get to know anybody.
We get replacements like that, yeah. That's the reason you try to take take care of them till they learn. Because what you learn in training is a basic, but it's very basic compared to once you get in the field. Everything is different.
Bob, was it on Tinian when you had the incident crossing the road?
Yeah, I remember we came across out of some high brush and so forth, and there was this little narrow road. And of course, we all were not going across the same time, making a break across there. And I started across that road, and all at once, something hit my canteen. I didn't know it was a canteen at that time, but it spun my cartridge belt, and I felt that water going down my leg, and I thought, uh-oh, I've been hit. But I didn't slow down. I kept going on like hell. Got on the other side and looked down there, and my belt was slung halfway around and it rounded going through my canteen. So I had one canteen left until I could pick up another canteen along the way off a casualty. And so we always carried 2 canteens. Water was always a priority.
But you came that close.
Yeah. I was lucky. I mean, never got hit. I had my hearing screwed up a couple times, but never got hit.
How did you feel when you knew that you'd come that close with somebody shooting a canteen off your hip?
I was scared to death when I felt that water go down my leg, and then I was so doggone happy I wasn't. And of course, everybody was tormenting the life out of me because I'm feeling around like crazy to see what's going on. And it was just one of those things that happened. I mean, I was really, quite frankly, more afraid of being shot by Marines than I was by Japanese, because they laid down a hell of a lot of fire. It wasn't wild, but you could walk into things or be in the bad place where you shouldn't be. That happens a lot.
You kind of forget about the different units out, different patrols.
Yeah, because you don't know, you can't see. I mean, they can be across the room in the damn jungle, you can't see them. You know that area, you can hear them. And people get, once in a while you get somebody's trigger happy, he'll shoot when he shouldn't shoot. And that's the last thing. Luckily, the units I joined had been under fire before, and so there wasn't a lot of wild firing at all. But you always had somebody got a little nervous or pop off a few rounds, and that's when you get hit.
Do you have much communications when you're out in the field?
I'm the old Corps. Everything was done by runners because the radios never worked. Somebody had to carry the message back and forth. So you had 3 runners in a platoon, and give those kids credit. I mean, they go out there running around one platoon units by themselves. Back at our base, everything was done by the bugle. Of course, we had no electricity, so all formations were sounded by a bugle. So I say I'm ancient. I mean, everything was done on that basis. And voice commands, and it had to be carried on. The bigger radios, you had a battalion and so forth. I did see some of the talkers, the Indians, the Navajo Indians who were back in battalion, where they had the better radios and so forth. And but I didn't know who they were or what they were. I just happened to notice they were different looking people and talking somehow or something different when we walked by them, but never heard anything about them until after the war. Never thought that was security and so forth, that they weren't supposed to talk about them because we knew they were Indians. We had a lot of Indians in our unit. You get sort of used to strange things happening when you're in a rifle company. And it's a very close-knit organization. I mean, you got approximately 247 Marines in our rifle company, and you break it down to the different platoons and the squads, and they get tight together. You know, after a while, I felt like I knew about half the people in the company, in George Company, the 2nd Marines, then, where I spent most of my time. But you're always working together, doing things, and so you become acquainted.
How long did it take you to get all the way across the island?
I think we were about 8 days before we finally got to the other side of there.
Do you know how big Tinian was?
No, I can't give you the dimensions on that. It wasn't a big island at all. It's just slow going.
Bob, was it on Tinian where you ran into the Japanese light tanks, or was that on Saipan?
That was on Tinian where we ran into the light tanks about the 3rd day, yeah.
Tell us about that.
It wasn't really much. I mean, they just had a few tanks left by that time, and they tried to push through us, and the Japanese light tanks, if you caught them broadside, you could hold them with BAR, with 30-06 rounds that would take it through them on sides. They were that lightly armored. We had bazookas or rocket launchers, and those people did a pretty good job of knocking them out. They slowed them down, but they came, it probably took about, it seemed like forever, but probably it was probably not over 20 minutes before they had wiped out their towers, and that was the end of it.
You talked about having American tanks there, that they drew fire. Was it still good to be close to them?
Oh yes, we like working with them, but the thing that I always laugh about, when we first started campaigns, I think we had probably about 25 yards of telephone wire in the back end of the tank and a telephone back there, so you would go up there and communicate with the tank commander and call out targets, so on and so forth, while he was buttoned up. By the time the campaign was over with, I swear there was 75 yards of phone in there, because we'd argue like hell, who's going to go up there, and your turn to go talk to the tank, you know, because tanks draw fire. So that line kept getting longer and longer. We get somebody with a comm wire, tie into it, and the wire get a little bit longer to get a little bit further away from that tank. But when you're working with them, the Japanese would try to come up and take the tank out. They would carry landmines themselves, anti-tank mines, and just charge up and set the explosive off right on the side of the tank, trying to knock it off. So we were walking right alongside of them to protect the tanks, which sounds strange, infantry walking alongside it. But you had to, because you never knew where those people were.
That's the first I've ever heard of that. That's really interesting. That, you look at the movies, they all walk along behind the tank for protection.
No, not. No, we tried to get behind them when things got too hot, but when they were moving, you had to spread out and protect the flanks of the tank, because they can't see what's going on.
When you wrapped it up on Tinian, then you went where then?
Had sort of, we were there, and the last day on Tinian, somebody tried to put a knee mortar around my hip pocket and rolled me down the side of a hill, and I couldn't hear for a while. And the corpsman said, okay, there's the ocean. He said, there's no sense you going the rest of the way, and they shipped me back to Saipan until my hearing came back. Came back from there to join the 24th Marines again. That was my outfit. And we walked from the airfield back up to where the company was. Took us 2 days of walking, and it was just strange. There was 5 of us all together. I was the only one that had the M1. I still had my M1 yet. The rest of the people hadn't bothered to pick up a rifle, so I was a very popular guy with that rifle. I had that and a Jap pistol and saber. So I'd spread out my weapons to everybody at night, and we'd find a place to hold up and then start walking again the next day. I no more got there, and they said, you're in the wrong place. you belong to Second Marines now. They had pulled everybody out that fast, and so I had to wait around for about a day. And from that day, they've got a truck came through and said, you got to ride over to the Second Marines, which was on the other side of the island. So I thought, boy, this is a good deal, because there's nobody else in the truck except the driver, and I got a chance to ride in the front seat of the truck rather than ride in the back of the bed. That didn't happen. The truck driver said, you get up in the back up there. He said, there's a lot of nips along that road. And he says, I want somebody up there with a rifle. And I said, okay. So I'm riding back of the truck, and he's going as fast as he can. And I had my rifle sitting with the butt of it on the deck of the truck. And it was a rider bouncing around so fast in that 6x6 truck that I finally took the clip out of my rifle. I figured the thing was going to go off if I didn't take it out. I was glad to get out of that truck. I mean, that was a scary ride that kid gave me. But we ended up in the Second Marines, and I joined up there. And I think one of the best things that happened there was I had been separated from all the people I had trained with. And I reported into the gunnery sergeant there, and the first thing he said, where's the rest of your gear? And I said, that's all they stripped me at the hospital. I said, okay, so we got to get you fitted back out again, because all I showed up with was an M1, K-bar, my Jap pistol and saber, and that was it. I didn't have a cartridge belt, I didn't have a pack or anything else, and a bandolier of ammunition I stole from the Army. Gunny took me over there, and I drew a lot of used equipment. I mean, it was beat up because these people had been from Guadalcanal on, and they had never been really refitted. And I got this gear, and I'm started back to where I was to meet up with my sergeant. And somebody yelled, hey, Sherlock, and I looked around, and here's my best friend. He's down in the 3rd platoon, and I ended up in the 2nd platoon. So we finished out the war together that way. And there was also a couple other people we'd gone through boot camp and infantry training with. So once I was back home, it felt good to be back with people you knew from a long time. But from there, I think we were there probably about a week, and then we went back aboard ship, aboard an LST, and went back over to Saipan, and landed in Sierra Canoa. They dropped the ramp on the LST there, and we went ashore. They put us on 6x6s, trucks, and took us over the far side of the island. And it was, to me at that time, it was really an interesting ride, because I never got a chance to see the island this way before. And I rode in a truck, and there was a natural bridge there on the island, that a stone bridge like you see out in Arizona. They blew the thing later so they could widen the road, but it was really pretty up through there. But you got to see a lot of the country, but it was wild up there. They pulled the trucks about 600 yards from the ocean and told us to dismount. We did. They said stack arms, and everybody take their K-bar or take their bayonet, and we're going to clean that cane field. This is where we're going to stay. So we built our base there. And we had picked up our packs by that time, so we had shoulder halves, and also we pitched shoulder halves. Luckily, we had a little stream down through there, so we had a place to get cleaned up. And we built a camp. I mean, basically, the camp was built by the Marines themselves. I mean, we had, in those days, people now wouldn't understand, but we had machine gun carts, which were a 2-wheel cart that they used to carry the 30 caliber guns in, and we cut 50-gallon drums apart, halved them, lashed them to the back of the 2-wheel cart, and they started a coral pit about half a mile down the road, and 5 of us would tow that cart down, filled up with a coral, tow it back to our area and start making tent decks and streets, and leveled the place out. Then eventually we built a camp. But in between time, we did that about 2 days, and then one day was patrol, and we were mopping up the island. So I kept track of, for some crazy reason, I don't know why, but I made 54 combat patrols on Saipan, wiping out the last of the Japanese there. Most of them were just nice walks in the woods. Some of them got real interesting. I got the tail end, the very tail end of Saipan. It was declared secured, and we landed, and they told us we were in the wrong place. We were going to Tinian. So back aboard ship, and that's all I had seen of it, just that up close. So I missed the Battle of Saipan, but I had the fun of cleaning up it afterwards. We didn't see a lot of civilians. I mean, that one thing we didn't have to worry about. There weren't that many people on the islands, and they pretty well took to the hills when. Then we had to round them up afterwards. It was over with, but we had people who could speak Japanese who would try to talk about the caves and so forth. And some would come, some wouldn't. They've been fed so much propaganda that was bad.
You mentioned on Saipan that you were going out and doing these cleanup patrols. Were these the Japanese that had kind of been left on the island after the battle and were just kind of trying to maintain existence?
When we first landed there and started the mopping up procedure, they were still organized into regular company units and so forth. They had stayed together, and they still had light machine guns, mortars. They had a few howitzers yet. It made it interesting for a while. But we broke those bands up, and then it was individually just breaking down, running down these small units. And you never knew what you'd walk into. You usually were platoon-side patrols, which was about 30, 40-some people. And I guess because I grew up out in the country, my sergeant decided I would make a good man to walk the point because I was obvious, saw things that you shouldn't see. So I walked the point, usually on and off with another damn good Marine by the name of Mace. And Mace usually walked number one, and I walked number two, but we'd rotate that all the time until we walked into things. We were lucky. I mean, Mace made it all the way through, and I did too.
I was just going to ask when you were getting, did you capture any of them, or did they just?
I never saw a prisoner. Okay. They didn't want to quit, and we didn't care.
Well, just in recent years, every once in a while they find somebody
And they haven't for a while, but a few people held out through the 70s.
They what?
A few of the soldiers held out through the 70s. They were in the hills of, I think, the Philippines and other places. And one of the stories we had early on when we were interviewing guys. One of the first guys we interviewed here in Broomfield was on Tinian. He was in rear duty for the most part, but stationed around the airfields. But he talked about the fact that they would set up a movie theater and have movies, and the Japanese would creep into the cane fields right behind them and watch the movies with them, then creep back down. But they would come in and try to steal food.
Oh yeah, that was
and get some rations because they were pretty much left on their own, and then back into the wilderness. But they could actually. He said every once in a while they had to kind of sweep the cane fields with a machine gun just to make sure they didn't get too close.
We patrolled all the island except the CB area. Never had to worry about the CBs. They took care of themselves. And they were good people. I mean, we always liked having CBs around. They were older men. They knew what they were doing. They had been trained by Marines, and they were didn't put up with a lot of nonsense with the Japanese or fooling around with them, but we had one USO show right after we got back to Saipan, and we went to that show, and every fourth man had to be carrying a weapon. There were still that many nips floating around. And I give Betty Hutton credit. I mean, she and another girl and a small band put on a show for us out there. Hot. Boy, it was hotter than the devil. And we ate it up. But every fourth Marine was armed. You couldn't. And when we went on Liberty, on Saipan, the Army truck drivers loved us. For some reason, the Army would not give the truck drivers weapons. So they're driving around, and there's these stray nips floating around who would like to knock off a truck now and then. So when we were at Liberty to go on the other side of them where we could get some good food and so forth, we'd stand alongside the road, and all we had to stand there with our M1 slung on our shoulder, and they'd come to a dead stop, pile us in the back of the truck, and we got a ride. Because they was always glad to see those people with the rifles. But we carried a rifle everywhere. I mean, I lived with an M1 for almost 2 years, never took it off my shoulder.
You carried both the M1 and the BAR. Which one did you prefer, and which one were you better with?
Depends on what was going on. BAR is a fine weapon, but they're heavy, they're big. I liked them. I fired expert with that when I went through training. And therefore I became a BAR man for a while till I finally got some bigger people to carry it. But I like both of them. I mean, basically I don't care for an M1 carbine, but you get either BAR or an M1 with both of our time very good weapons. Before we went up to Okinawa, I was still carrying a BAR, and I had that thing slung on my shoulder. The butt plate only cleared by about 3 inches off the deck when I had it slung like that. And the colonel walked by and stopped, looked at me, and said, "Son, you need a set of wheels for that thing." I said, "Yes, sir." When we came back from Okinawa, they started giving out awards and so forth, and here I am standing in ranks with that BAR again. And he stopped to get it. He said, "That's a damn big rifle for you." And he turned to the lieutenant and said, "Why don't you get a bigger man to carry that?" And he said, "Well," he said, "one of my best BAR men." He said, "Get him an M1 again." And so I got an M1 back. And I was glad to see it because that rifle stripped down is 20 pounds plus you're carrying 13 mags for it. And you're carrying about close to 30-some pounds of weapon there, and rifle plus all the rest of your other gear. But boy, it's a fine weapon.
Bob, you mentioned that when you joined up with this unit, you had your M1 and you had your Japanese sword and pistol. Where did you get those?
The sword and the pistol came from Tinian. I think it was probably about the fourth night, and time's getting away now. They put a little probing attack on our line. We had dug in, and usually dug in 2 men to a hole. And you try to keep it so you could see the hole down next to you. There's usually 20 yards, 25 yards in between the holes. And all at once they start trying to come through the line, and they pop flares, and when the flares were going up, I happened to see the flash of this blade, Japanese blade. And I marked where it was, because I always wanted those Jap swords. I, at that time, wasn't a BAR man. I was still carrying an M1, and Ware, who was the BAR man I was doing, was sleeping, so I grabbed his BAR. I'd been trained on one, and fired 2 mags in general direction down there. Said, "Okay, see what happened." When things calmed down, why, I took off and ran down that way to see if I could find that sword. I found the sword. This Jap lieutenant still had the sword, carrying it in his hand, but the pistol he never drawn from the holster. It was still in the holster. So I grabbed the sword and thought I might as well take that pistol too. And so I had a hell of a time getting the pistol off of him, because I got the pistol because he had the shoulder strap around over, and rather than carry it around their waist. I got that off him, but he had a lanyard around his neck. And about that time, they got a little angry at us for all the noise that we were making, and they started shooting back. So I cut the doggone lanyard and took it back. So I got the lanyard yet. I still have it at home, but it's still in 2 pieces from where I cut it to get it off of him. And I'm running back to the hole, climbed to the hole, and Ware said, "That was a stupid thing to do." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Would you want the pistol?" And he says, "No." He says, "I've already sent one home." So I was okay. So I got a pistol too. So I carried that pistol and the saber with me back to the hospital, from the hospital back to the 2nd Marines. And old Gunny Farr said, "We better have that stuff secured." He said it's going to disappear. So he had the supply sergeant sign off for it, and they kept the pistol and the saber for me until I rotated back to the States then. So I carried it home too.
It's amazing. You know, I thought probably they'd just dump it or take it away.
Yeah. The Marine Corps was very good about it. I mean, they gave you a chit that you could, so you could bring home a rifle, a pistol, whatever, if you picked it up. After we got up to Japan, they had a lot of ordnance up there, a lot of Japanese rifles that they just gave out to people. I never bothered with the rifle because I had enough stuff to carry, so the pistol and the saber was all I was worried about. And once I parked it, that was the end of it until the war was over. It was amazing this stuff was up in those mountains that they had way up there. I mean, you would be walking along and these little narrow trails, you'd find artillery pieces, you'd find all kinds of ordnance, and that's where I made friends with Sergeant Wright Guy that we had, and for some reason we hit it off real quick, like a private and this buck sergeant, and Al taught me demolition, and that was one of the best things he ever taught me, because when the war was over with, when we went to Japan, that's all I did for 4 months up in Japan was blow things up. Detached duty and just roamed the island with a 4-man detail. And we destroyed ordnance up there. I guess that's one of the reasons I were hearing aids too, because I had so much noise.
One story that I forgot, years ago, a couple of years ago, a group of us get together, all players and whatnot, and sort of a show and tell thing, and Bob brought one Japanese sock. Tell that story.
Oh, well, Japanese socks, they're straight socks. There's no heel to them, just a straight. But they're great for covering canteens. And so wherever we could gather up things like this, now we would cut the tops off of them and sew them around the top of our canteen, and you had more insulation and you didn't have the rattle of canteen. So that was my donation, or my thing was my one Japanese sock. Everybody thought I was crazy, but I mean, it's a piece of field equipment. But I had one sock, I had a sea bag at home, and one day I got to running through it, and here was that sock down there, because I'd probably used the other one, replaced it on one of the canteens. And
They didn't know they were furnishing you with something helpful, did they?
oh yeah, well, we used everything. I mean, Japanese had this little cans of like Sterno. Remember the old heating little cans when we were young? It used to be over a dime store. They had those for that, and that was the first thing we would go through their gear hunting for, so we could heat our coffee up with those little cans, because we didn't have anything like that. And so we always had to make a fire to heat your coffee or drink it cold. And I never did figure out how the devil to drink canteen cup hot coffee without burning my lips.
What kind of food did you have when you were out in the field?
Most of the time, sea rations. In the morning, they usually issued you K rations, and usually carried a day's ration with you, unless it was the first part of a campaign. You had 3 days' rations with you, but our trouble was we stripped down, dropped everything, and we carried usually used our gas masks, threw the gas mask away, and used the gas mask pouch to carry everything, because we dropped our pack. And so we had just the rations, and basically you had your cartridge belt, the bandolier of ammunition, the full cartridge belt, 2 canteens, your jungle kit, fighting knife. If you were an M1, you had a bayonet. Took your poncho and draped it over the back of your cartridge belt, and that's the way you traveled. And your bottle of mosquito dope, that was the main thing you wanted to have. The mosquitoes were fierce.
For somebody that doesn't know the difference, what is the difference between a C ration and a K ration?
Well, about the best way I could K ration came in a little wax paper box, and usually had some kind of ration, as they call a breakfast ration, in there, and crackers and so forth. C ration just came in cans, 3 cans, 3 different varieties. You had meat and vegetable hash, meat and beans, and beans. And that was the 3 of them. And you carried usually, well, you dropped everything. You did keep your spoon, and you stuck your spoon inside your canteen cup, and had a canteen cup, and that's why your spoon was everything you ate with. And just open up a tin and eat it while you could. And we used to laugh about, we were very sanitary. When you got through eating, you'd take your spoon and wipe it on the inside of your trouser leg, because that was usually the cleanest place. You could wipe it and stick it back in there and then keep going. It wasn't very clean.
That's something I'm not sure we've ever asked anybody about that, because it just hasn't really come up. But there are a lot of people who wouldn't know the difference if they're watching this.
Yeah, it's just strange little things you learn that from the people who are already ahead of you know.
Were you able to get any hot meals if you went back to the rear, or got to a base somewhere?
Say again?
Were you able to get hot meals if you went back to the rear and went back to a base?
No. I'm trying to think. When we were patrolling on Saipan, yeah, we'd probably be out maybe for 2 days, come back in, you get a good meal then. During the campaign, you just lived on your rations. I remember one of the best memories I have was on Tinian. We had a really heavy rain. I mean, it started raining just about dark, and in about an hour's time, our holes were filled up, our foxholes were filled up, and we just laid on the outside of them. And it seemed strange, but we were cold as the devil. And that morning, when it got light, here comes the sergeant. The squad leader came down behind the skirmish line. He had 2 other people, and they had a big can of hot coffee, and somehow or another he had gotten hold of some hot bread. And nothing ever tasted so good in my life as we came down through there, and you put out your canteen cup and he'd fill it up with hot coffee, and he'd break off a hunk of that bread and throw a hunk of the bread to you, about a third of the loaf. I didn't mind the fingerprints in the bread at all. They just added a color to it, you know. But boy, that tasted good. Nothing I think has ever tasted any better than that in my life. Warm and have that warm bread.
We went a long time without anything decent.
Yeah, yeah, water was always, fluid was always a great thing, I mean, and the big problem is a lot of times they didn't clean those doggone expeditionary cans out well, and they have maybe oil or gasoline in there before, and you got a terrible taste with it, you know, but you were thirsty, you drank it.
I think that'd give you more problems than anything.
Yeah.
We saved some sea rations for later on. I got a hold of some of them in 1958.
Oh, they
They were still canned.
yeah. No, every night they'd always have to go back down to wherever you could get trucks halfway close to you and carry the stuff up, carry ammunition, water, and food were the order of priorities. And they would come up with them, always had a detail, had to go down and carry them back up. And those damn water cans were heavy.
Did they keep you pretty well supplied, or did you run into situations where you kind of outran the supplies at times?
No, they kept us pretty well supplied. I mean, truthfully, I mean, I never was involved in anything that I was very fortunate. I never got into really extreme heavy fighting at all. I mean, probably the most I'd ever fire at one time would be 2 or 3 clips out of, or 2 or 3 mags. And things happen quick and fast, and they're over with, and it gets very dull and slow going. And so you don't use up a lot. And I always gave my grenades to somebody. I don't like to throw those things. This base that I talked about could throw like a baseball pitcher, and I'd always, when Mace started throwing pitches grenades, I'd always throw him in mine and say, "Here, you do a hell of a better than I job," you know, and let him throw them. When I went overseas, I was issued a few units of fire at going ashore at Tinian, and until the war was over with, I was never without a full unit of fire. Where the other units, they used to strip them of their ammunition. The only thing they took away from us were grenades for a safety factor.
But you didn't like throwing grenades anyway.
No, they issued 2, and then at night they'd bring up more, and you would carefully keep the container and take the extra grenades and bend the pins out so they were easier to pull, and get them ready, and then put them on top of your parpet. The next morning you put them back in, wrap the container back up and turn them back in, and then somebody'd have to carry them out and then carry them back up again the next day, because you always kept 2. Grenades, the first thing I always did, and I was taught that by the old timers, that you bent the pins out, so it was harder than hell to pull the pin. And the second thing, you put a piece of tape around the handle. So we weren't like these people running around with grenades hanging all over them and all. I mean, we had them taped up pretty tight and carried them inside of our dungaree jackets.
Bob, didn't your sergeant at one time tell a new person to watch you and when you started really chewing your gum? I think that's a great story.
I never was smoked. I didn't like the taste of it. And besides, it made me thirsty, and water was always a priority. So I never took up the smoking habit. But I chewed gum, and I traded my ration cigarettes to people for their chewing gum. And Nick Malone, who's my sergeant, I got a kick out of Nick. One day, I heard him telling one of the replacements we had come into it. He said, "Watch Sherlock." He said, "When he's chewing that gum," he said, "when he starts chewing it hard," he says, "all hell's going to break loose." Because I must have been concentrating like crazy because I could chew gum hard then. But I mentioned these names, and we were sort of the Irish mafia there. Our Sergeant Wright guy name was Doherty. The sergeant had the first squad, was Minahan. I was in the second squad, that was Malone, and Kelly had the third squad. So they were all East Coast Irish, and I tell you, we had a ball with them.
Bob, there's one story that I think I remember you telling about while you were still on Saipan, when you had one of your men up on the water point, and you were on guard duty. And
This it shows you how strange things happen. This Sergeant Wright guy that I mentioned, Al Gester, one hell of a Marine. He won the Silver Star on Tarawa, and he was the most, if anything was going to happen, I'd rather be around Al. And luckily, he and Al and I are the last two of the group left that I've been able to keep in contact with. But Al was Sergeant of the Guard, and I guess because we were buddies that I ended up being supernumerary, which meant all I was supposed to do was fill in case somebody had to be relieved on a post. So we're sitting in a tent, and we had no electricity on Saipan.
this was at night, right?
This was at night, and we had no electricity, so all we got is a regular old farm lantern, oil lantern down there. And Al and I were sitting there, and Al said, "I'm tired." He said, "I'll take a quick nap." So he lay down on the cot, took his pistol belt off, and I'm just sitting here in a chair with my feet up, and all at once we hear 3 rifle shots up at the water point. And we both on our feet right away, and I grabbed a riot gun out of the rack and a handful of shotgun shells and shoved it in my dungaree jacket pocket, and Al grabbed his .45, and we started running up the trail to see what was going on up there. And I'm fumbling around trying to load that doggone riot gun. And we had ran out of brass casings on the shotgun shells, so we had paper rounds issued to us. They had swollen from the moisture. I couldn't get the doggone shotgun shells into the riot gun. About that time, I heard click, clatter, and Al hit by accident the release on the magazine on his .45, and he didn't have another magazine, so we can't find his magazine for his .45. He said, "I think we better stop here." So we went back down to the tent. I grabbed my M1, and he picked up his cartridge belt, and we took off back up to the point, and it was, the Japs had been trying to get water off the water point up there, and there was a young fellow up there by the name of James Neely, who was out of Kentucky, and the things he could do with a rifle was amazing. I mean, and he's the one that fired, and we got up there, and it's too pitch black, couldn't see anything. Al asked him, he says, "Did you hit anything, Neely?" And he says, "I don't know." So we waited, the officer of the day came up and checked things out. We went back down, and the next morning, Neely had to go see the colonel because there wasn't supposed to be any firing unless there was a... And he said, "How many rounds did you fire?" And he told him, I fired 3 rounds, sir. And he said, "Do you hit anything?" He said, "Yes, sir, there's 3 Japs up there." Colonel said, "That's good." He says, "I don't want to waste any ammunition." There's a lot of black humor going on around about that time, but Neely was down in the 3rd platoon with my friend Galen, and I always liked Neely. I mean, we celebrated his son's birth by drinking Raisin Jack one night, and had a big night. He was wanted to get home to see that boy, and he made it home.
That sounds like Sergeant York.
He was good. Tell you, we finished up on Saipan. We trained and went aboard ship, went up to Okinawa. Again, fortunately, we didn't land on Okinawa. We got hit by kamikazes the first day out there. And I never liked being locked below decks, so I always volunteered for gun crew. And so I was on a 20-millimeter gun and got to see all the fun. They took out the LST in front of us, the one on our stern, and hit the command ship off on our port side, and it was a busy morning. I mean, I couldn't figure out where those airplanes came from, and nobody knew they were kamikazes. They just thought they were shooting them down. But they decided the landing was going so well that they would keep us back on floating reserve. So we floated around out there for probably about 3 weeks before they finally sent us back to Saipan. Then we started training for the assault in Japan.
Excuse me, Bob, but you're a Marine on a Navy ship. How did you come to be on a gun crew?
Basically, they always wanted extra people on these guns. So they always got a job as ammunition, passing ammunition, or doing something like this. And I was assigned to a 20-millimeter on the port side. And my job was just to wind up magazines and pass them up to the assistant gunner, and he in turn would load the 20. And of course, the 2 young sailors taught me how to make the doggone thing work. So from then on, in case we lost some people, I could man that gun. But I would rather be up top side rather than be locked below decks. I just didn't like being locked below decks.
You're talking about kamikazes and the attack. That had to be just wild with so many things going on around you. What was it like to be in that kind of an attack?
I had never been in anything like that before. I remember we had general quarters, and I'm up by the gun crew up there, and all at once I see out on the horizon, you could see where the destroyers were firing with their 5.38 3/8-inch guns. Pretty soon the 40s opened up as they came closer into us, and then the 20s. When the 20s started, I thought, this is too close. And about that time, all I could see was the exhaust of these airplanes coming in. You couldn't see them, but you could see the exhaust of the... And they must have been in formation because they just popped it through 3 ships, and luckily didn't choose us. And being a rifleman, I couldn't dig this hole in that steel deck, and so I started liking the Navy a hell of a lot better than I did before that. I give those guys credit. I mean, we used to give them a hard time about they had good chow and a good soft rack to sleep in and dry and so forth, but boy, when those planes start coming in, it's not a good place to be.
You mentioned that when you first saw this, that you didn't realize they were kamikazes. At what point did you realize that they weren't just coming in and strafing or dive bombing or anything, that they were actually coming at the LSTs?
Actually, we didn't find out what was going on for probably a day or so till they finally told us what what was actually happening with the kamikazes at that time. Nobody had heard about them. At least it hadn't filtered down to the troops, and so that was. We just thought they were planes coming in and been hit, and they figured, well, we were hit, we're going in, and that's it. So it, as we kept being fed information of the ships being attacked off the southern part of, or the northern part rather, of Okinawa, then it was realized that these were kamikazes.
What was it like when you got to Japan, and did you have contact with the people there?
That was, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question, got rambling around. When they dropped the bomb, we didn't believe it. We were coming back from a training session, and we'd been up on the south, down Marpy Point, and the company was coming back in column down through the road, and all at once the harbor just lit up with all kinds of anti-aircraft fire. And we found out, we thought it was an air raid. But pretty soon here comes a line of Army trucks come racing up the road, yelling, the war's over, and our skipper was very unhappy about these trucks coming through our column, and he yelled at the gunny, take a detail and stop those people, and he did. No more trucks came through. But the thing that tickled me, if you've ever seen a column of Marines going down, coming out of the field, they're a very unmilitary looking unit. I mean, people got their rifles wrapped around their necks or underneath their arms or slung on, and somebody yelled, Army ahead, and rifles came down, slung arms. The sergeant started calling cadence, and we went through the Army units in cadence, in step. And after all, we're Marines. We're different. No. You look at a rifle company that's been out in the field for a long time, and your knees are out, your elbows are out. You take your fighting knife and you cut the bottom of your dungarees off so they won't drag on the ground. We were not a military-looking unit, I'll tell you. But the only thing was our weapons were clean. Marine Corps is hell on rifles. But what I said on that story about going, every time we went through past an Army unit, it was back at cadence.
I can see that happening.
Yes.
I could see the air man ahead of me always had his carried back across his back of his neck like this, you know.
Yeah,
You know, very military looking.
it was an easier way to carry it.
Oh, we had our helmet liners, covers, or so they were hanging down, not inside our helmet, so it covered the back of our neck so they wouldn't get some sunburn. And boy, they called us raggedy-ass Marines, and we were.
There for a fashion show, were you?
But we got back, and finally the word came through, yes, the war was over, and we went aboard ship at about 4 weeks afterwards. We got up to Nagasaki, Japan, 5 weeks after they dropped the bomb. That was the darndest thing I ever saw in my life was Nagasaki. We pulled into the harbor. There's a light cruiser in the harbor, ours, and the hospital ship taking all POWs. And we would landed on the remains of the dock next to the Mitsubishi war plant there, which was nothing but twisted steel. And we stayed aboard ship for about 2 days, 3 days, I guess, unloading ship. Then we went up to Japanese Army camp right above Nagasaki. We could look all over and from there on, we, for about 3 weeks, just went into town, patrolled the area, cleaned up ordnance, and did this type of work. And Nagasaki was sat on this harbor surrounded by low hills and mountains. So where they dropped the bomb, everything was flat. There was nothing. But on the reverse slope of these hills, there's sections of the town still there, and the people were there. So the whole 5 weeks I was, or 4 weeks I was in Nagasaki, I don't think I saw over 8 or 10 people actually who came up to us. They were scared to death of Marines. We did what we were supposed to do and kept out of the area, and went into the area. We knew nothing about the radiation. Nobody had told us anything. We knew nothing about it. So, I mean, that was our contact basically with the people. Once we left Nagasaki, went to Kanoya, Japan. That's when I was detached and did the demolition work. Then we were right in amongst the people, and they were very cooperative.
You really had quite a run there with the atomic bomb. The fact that you were on Tinian and took Tinian, or they took off, with the Enola Gay.
Yeah, it was a strange coincidence.
How much did you, I was going to say you didn't know about radiation. Did anybody even think about that until after you got back?
No, really. There wasn't much comment. There wasn't much of anything said about it. When we went into the harbor, we had to go over the side. We were in on attack transports and went over to a cargo ship out in the harbor there. One of ours that came in with us. Climbed the cargo nets and went back aboard. That was the ship we rode into the dock. Then we, so our contact there, we started loading this ship, and about the third cargo net went over the side. 3 of us decided we wanted to see what was down there. So this Neely I have talked about, and I, and our Navy corpsman who was with us, and we went over, rode the cargo net down, and took off to see the town. And we walked around. Nobody was around to speak of it. Once we walked into a street where there was houses yet, somebody would yell, "Rick Sentai," and off they would take. And we never did get to see the people, but just as well, because I was carrying a K-bar, so was Neely. And Doc had a .45, and that was all we had with us. So if they wanted to be nasty, we would have been in big trouble, but we didn't think about that. The war's over. We came back, and here are all these MPs ringing the area. And they stopped us and said, "How the devil did you people get on the other side of the line?" I said, "There's no line here when we went through," you know. So that's how much we knew about radiation. I mean, nobody knew it, and that was it.
After the war, when people became more aware of radiation, did you have any fear that you'd been in this area and that it was going to affect you later on?
I've had several friends who've had later years had cancer and so forth. They still haven't been able to make sure there was any part of the radiation or just natural sequence of living. But no, it's, I have been fortunate. I've had no indications from it, and most of the people I know of, we were just in and out of there fast enough, evidently, that I would think that people who were, like the engineers who were moving a lot of debris and so forth, would probably have had more exposure than we did.
You mentioned the demolition detail. What kind of things were you doing when you moved into that work?
I've often wondered about the demolition detail, whether Malone had decided he wanted to get rid of me or he's giving me a break or what. But all at once, he came around and he said, "I got a good duty for you." He said, "You know demolition, so we need a demolition man to go on a detail." Okay. So I met up with 3 other Marines. There was a corporal, and the 3 of us were PFCs, and old Doc Kaiser, our platoon corpsman went along with us. We picked up 2 Japanese army trucks who were driven by charcoal. They didn't go very fast. I could run as fast as the truck would go. And a Japanese interpreter and 2 Japanese truck drivers. And we filled those trucks up with, at the beginning, with C4 and TNT, and went out and started going to airfields or any place that there was any Japanese ordnance. And if at the airfields we could burn the planes, we burned the planes. Basically what you did would take the camouflage netting and put it in the cockpit of the planes, check to make sure the guns were all unloaded on the plane, put gasoline in the wing tanks, pour oil down the inside of the plane, take an empty Japanese beer bottle. That was the big chore, was emptying those beer bottles before. Fill them with grass and light them and throw them on the plane, and they would blow. And we got to betting how far we could make them raise off the ground. Heavy ordnance, like naval guns, so forth, coastal guns, we'd usually drop a thermite grenade down it, or else we'd put a charge around the base of it, blow it. Warehouses where there was a lot of aircraft engines, things like that, we would just take half a stick of dynamite and stick down there the scoop of every engine, and run wire. We were using electric caps. And we go outside and get on the other side of the berm and use the battery of the truck and spark it off that way. Japanese drivers were not very happy with it. They would crawl underneath the truck every time we did that. So we destroyed an awful lot of stuff. But it was good duty because everybody else had to be, if you had liberty, you had to be back on base at 6 at night. And there was just the 5 of us. And we roamed the island with those trucks. And we kept in contact with a platoon from Fox Company who provides security for us. And we check within and usually go find out where they were staying that night and go sleep where Fox Company was. The Marine Corps is a small unit. And I was amazed at the number of people I knew in Fox Company when I started working with them, who I'd trained with back in the States or gone through boot camp. And even when I was called back for the Korean War, my first day back on the base, I'm standing in chow line and somebody yells, "Hey, Sherlock, what are you doing here?" 4 years later, I bump into people I had known, and they were back again too. So, I mean, it was amazing. And before that night was over, there were 6 of us back together again. So the Corps is a small unit, not a close-knit unit.
One of the stories I remember, Bob, and I think this was after the war was over, and it may have been back in the States, I don't really remember, but you were looking for a friend of yours, Mustard maybe his name was, and the column was coming by and you kept yelling out his name.
We had a good friend we went through boot camp with, met on the train, and this one friend of mine, Galen, and I stayed together all the way through, but this other one decided he wanted to be a machine gunner. So when we went through infantry training, he went to machine gun school. And we kept track with each other all the time. I mean, he ended up in the 8th Marines, and we were in the 2nd Marines. And but whenever we got a chance, we'd get together and just have a good time. So when we were rotating back to state, we were going to Sasebo, where we go back aboard ship and go back to States. And so we're waiting for our friend to come. And here, raining like the devil, and so Galen and I go down and sit on a stone wall there, wait and watch the 8th Marines coming up a hill. They're coming up in column, and every time they pass us, we'd yell out the name. And no answer. Finally, somebody answers back, "He ain't here. Where is he?" He's in the brig. What happened? He decked the first sergeant. 4 months later, we finally got together back at home because he had to do these 30 days on bread and water in the brig. Then he had to make up the 30 days before he could, for the time lost. And then finally he got rotated back, and we finally got together 4 months later. But he always told us he was the salty one of the bunch because he had more time in the Corps than we did, you know. We called him a brig rat, though. It was quite an experience. I mean, I've been in contact with these people up through the years, and time has whittled away at us. And now Al Gester is 92 years old, and I'm 87 years old, and I can't figure out how we did it.
I remember a story about, I think it's when you got back to the States and the ice cream story.
I've always liked ice cream. When we moved in out of the country, we moved in to town, and right across the street from us was a ice cream parlor. And I was in my seventh heaven in high school because I could go into it. Well, for the 2 years I was overseas, I had ice cream 5 times because I kept track of that. I mean, I came home, Galen and I came back, got off the ship, and somehow we got separated. And I got on a different 6x6 going up to Camp Pendleton. And somebody yelled, "Here, room up here," and I threw my pack up to them, and they reached down and drugged me back up in the back end of the truck, and I'm sitting back there, and I don't know any of these guys. And the guy sitting on the end sees one of these little ice cream carts. You used to have on bicycles, on an ice cream cart, and this kid is riding around selling bars of ice cream. And he yells for him to come over. And he comes over, and he says, "How many do you want?" And he says, "I want the whole cart." The kid says, "What?" You know, he says, "I want the whole cart." So he passes all the ice cream up and starts just handing it out to everybody in the truck. There's probably about 30 of us at the back end of that truck. And I said, "Hey, Mac, I haven't got any money to pay." I said, "I've been paid for 2 months." He says, "Don't worry about it." He said, "I played poker with the Navy all the way back to the station." He said, "This is on the Navy." So we had ice cream on the truck, got up to Pendleton, and Galen and I got off trucks and bed up again, and went in, found bunks side by side. Galen said, "You know," he says, "I saw a PX over there." He says, "Let's go check that thing out." Okay. So we go over there, and the first thing we buy, each of us, is a pint of vanilla ice cream. And we sit out there on the porch eating that ice cream, thinking, boy, this is good. Sunshine, warm, ice cream, nobody give us a hard time. Galen said, "You know what?" He says, "I saw some raised donuts back in there." He said, "I think I'll go get some." I said, "Okay, Galen." He goes back in, he comes back with a dozen of them. And I think I ate 2 of them, and I was full. He finished the rest of them off. And we're sitting there, and pretty soon he looks around me, he says, "You know, I don't feel so good." You know? And I say, "I wonder why." But Galen was a big far boy, and I mean, he was about as wide as he was tall. Perfect BAR man. But I lost Galen about 2 years ago, but we kept in contact all the way through. He was in my wedding party.
What did you do after the war, and what were you planning to do before you went back in for that stint in Korea?
I really had no plans. I was very, as I said, I thought, well, I'm going back to the Corps. So first job I got, I came home and I went down to the employment office, see what was around, and they offered me a job on a section gang on a railroad or putting Quonset huts together, so I chose the Quonset huts. I thought it was a pretty good job, though. I got $35 a week, and that was a lot of money compared to what I was making before. And but I was bored with it, didn't like it. Got a chance to go into a management training program for a large chain. Started that, and then Korea came along, and I'm glad they did, because I didn't care for that either. And I ended up working for Blue Cross and Blue Shield in marketing, and I did 28 years in marketing in Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Traveled around the country. I worked in Illinois and Texas, and ended up here in Colorado. Never went very far, but I did get into lower management and do a little bit of work all that way. But I resented being treated that way. I mean, after all, I've seen things and done things and been treated like a man since I was 17, and some older guy who's telling me, talking down to me, just didn't sit well with me. And I ended up, while I was home, ran into 4 other former Marines, and we just had a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday we met at a local tavern and sat there and swapped sea stories. Each of us had served in a different division, so we had all been in different places, and it was just fun, just sitting back and relaxing. They knew us because we always showed up, green trousers, khaki shirts, because really civilian clothes were hard to come by at that time too.
Wish you'd had a video camera sitting around that table sometime.
I wish I had, yeah. I wish I had. 2 of them were brothers, and one of them I had gone to high school with, and the other was an older brother I didn't know, and the other 2 I had met in my years in town, and we had a good time. We understood each other. We liked just sitting there, and we were sort of looking down our noses, I guess, at everybody else who weren't Marines, you know. But we had a good time. I never cared for beer that way, and I get 1 beer for the whole night, and I come home those 2 nights about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my mother was very unhappy with me. And she, one night, sat there and told me she wasn't going to put up with her son coming home at that time. And I couldn't believe her. And I said, well, Mom, I said, maybe I better go back to where I belong anyway. And I went in and started packing my sea bag. She said, where are you going? I said, I'm going back to the Corps. She said, oh, don't do that, you know. She never waited up for me again.
I want to ask you too, you said you were called back in for Korea. What happened then?
Korea was sort of a strange thing. I had planned to go back into the Corps after I'd been home for probably about 3 months, and I was at 20 years old. Everybody wanted to treat me like a high school kid yet, and I was a non-commissioned officer in the Marine Corps at that time, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the life, and I decided, well, I spent the last 3 years growing up in the Marine Corps, I'm going to go back. And my wife, she said, why don't you wait a little while? Well, I waited a little while and got married, so I didn't go back. So the next best thing, I joined the inactive reserve. And strangely enough, 4 years later, here comes Korea, and here comes a letter. And that's when I reported down to Camp Lejeune, and met a lot of people I had known before, and ended up in a 2nd Combat Service Group. And my dad died in the Corps while I was overseas, so I never got to see him again. And I don't know, evidently they keep a record or something, because all at once they pulled me out of a combat unit where I was sole rising son, and sent me down to the supply depot down there, and I ended up with, rather than a line sergeant, I was now a warehouse chief. And that was my tour of duty, was all down at Camp Lejeune down there, and I've always felt sort of strange about it. I'm a trained infantryman, trained rifleman, and I don't know, I felt like I'm not the best Marine in the world, but I at least knew what I was doing. I might have been able to save some lives if I had had a rifle squad, rather than working in a warehouse. But the warehouse was a good deal. I was in a very bad mood when I reported into that unit. Reported the first sergeant, and he said, "Sergeant, there's your desk and there's your typewriter." And he said, "You go to work." I said, "I don't type." He said, "You will sit at that desk until you learn to type." Well, I said, "I will like hell. I'm a sergeant of Marines. I'm not an office pinky." He and I didn't hit it off. He did not have one battle star in any of his ribbons. I had a few. He said, "You want to see the man?" Most time, I would not want to go see a colonel. I want to know anything to do with him. But I was fighting mad then, and I said, "Yeah, let's go talk to him." So we did. Thank God he was an infantry officer who'd just gone relieved from command of a battalion of Marines. Now his time was to run the supply unit. And he said, "I hear you had trouble with the first sergeant." And I said, "No, sir, I just don't type. And I'm a line sergeant." And he asked me where I served and so forth. And he said, "Do you know anything about," he had my civilian papers in front of him there too. He said, "I see you've been going through management training, and part of your management training program with this company is working in a warehouse. Can you run a warehouse?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I can run one." He said, "I want you to set one up. Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And so I was assigned to a warehouse, set it up, started running it, started picking people up, and we started. And it was good duty. I'm a buck sergeant. He gave me open gate liberty, which I wasn't supposed to have, but he gave me a chit that I could go in and out the gate anytime I wanted to. I ended up with my own little pickup truck. I borrowed things for him because he was in all the infantry and he knew how to get things and I knew how to get things. It was time for me to go back home again when I was relieved for duty. He called my wife and myself in and tried to talk me into shipping over. I was ready to. He made some offers that he was a fine gentleman. I believe he would have kept those. It was the recruiting. And I looked over at my wife and she's going like this. And I thought, better not, because it's got a bad choice if I go the right way. But Colonel Houston was one of the finest officers I ever served under. He was a picture of a Marine officer. He was a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute from Virginia, tall, slender, white-haired, very gentlemanly, and but you didn't mess with him. But for some reason, we hit it off, and as far as you can hit in between the rank grade there. But I was able to do things for him, and he did an awful lot of things for me. And he made the promise to my wife, and as long as he was in the Corps, I would stay with him. And he'd already put me up for staff, and he said in 2 years you'll be a warrant officer, but I would have liked to have taken that up, but I didn't. But I've always felt bad about not being in a rifle company again.
Did you have reunions where you all got back together at once?
Only had one reunion that I went to was here in Denver about 12 years ago. And by some strange instance, we had 12 people from George Company show up there, and we really had a ball. And by another strange instance, I knew all of them. And they were all either from the 2nd Squad or 2nd Platoon. And Gessner showed up. And that was a lost cause. And my fire team leader I'd had for a long time, a guy by the name of Frenchie, ended up, he said he was always going to go back to San Diego and marry his girlfriend. He did. Became a cop on the San Francisco Police Department. Retired as an inspector. Crazier than a pet coon. We're sitting at the table, and he says, "Sherlock, go get us some beer." And I looked at my friend Frenchie. "I outrank you, you go get the beer." And he said, "I never thought I'd hear that," you know. He went and got the beer. But the funniest one I think was ever, while we're doing this, when I was back for the Korean thing, I went through New Jersey, and I thought, well, I'm going to call Nick, because we got to be pretty close friends along the way, and Malone had a way about him. Nick was about 5'6", weighed about 130 pounds, little salty guy. And one day we were sitting down in a little gully, the two of us. And Nick looked at me and he said, "You know," he said, "Sherlock," he said, "the reason we don't get hit is we can run like hell and we're small." He always threatened to make me a field music whenever I would screw up doing something. He said, "I'm going to make you a damn field music," you know. So I called him on the phone, and I said, "Is this Nick Malone?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, are you Nick Malone from George Company, 2nd Battalion?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Who in the blank wants to know?" And I said, "Damn you, Malone, this is Sherlock, Sergeant Sherlock." And the only answer I got was, "Jesus Christ, the Corps' gone to hell." You know? I fell out of the phone booth laughing, you know. And my wife's trying to figure out what's going on. I'm leaning against that phone, just howled, because that was Nick. The Corps' gone. He made sergeant, you know. But we kept trying to contact. Nick and I, up until about 4 years ago when he died, lived in the county, down in Florida, and I never saw him again, but we found each other after about 20 years and wrote and talked and so forth. So we kept pretty close.
Those were lifetime friendships then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're very close. I mean, when somebody will cover you, you'll cover me, and they'll stand up and cover you. They're pretty damn good friends.
Are you a member of Cooper's Troopers?
Did I what?
Are you a member of Cooper's Troopers?
No. No, I went down there a couple of times, but it got to be a long drive down there. And of course, I lived over in Longmont before I moved over here. And I went down there a few times. I had a friend that I worked with who was in the 8th Marines, and we hit it off. And we used to meet down there. But he's gone now, too, so I just sort of There's very few World War II people roaming around anymore.
Do you think the Corps is living up to everything that it has been over the years right now, and what's happening in the Afghanistan? And
Yeah, my wife gets mad at me because I tied to that TV set trying to figure out what's going on, and I fascinated by the equipment and all they have now. It's just fantastic. When you had the colonel here at the museum, I enjoyed that so much because he showed me quite a bit of the. That's how I met our friend Bob. We both like antique firearms. We both like history. Bob carries it much further than I do, but we've both been interested in things like that. But the Marine Corps has always been something I've been, and so I followed them through the years. And I like to see all the different changes. I feel like probably they did way back about 1918 when the old Civil War veteran was looking at these people with he's thinking about, I stood in line with that muzzle-loading rifle musket, and I feel the same way when I'd be standing in line with my VAR compared to the equipment these kids have now. It's fantastic. And the good thing is they don't lose so many people.
you are the epitome of once a Marine.
You what?
You're really once a Marine, always a Marine, aren't you?
That's right. I grew up with that. I had nothing. I loved my dad and I respected him. He raised me like that. I mean, when he said Robin, I didn't move around at all. I did whatever was told because otherwise I was Bob. But when he said Robin, the time was, the monkey business was over with. But he was fair, but he was strict, and I guess I grew up always wanting to be a Marine. I will die a Marine.
Mentioned once a Marine, always a Marine, and I found a T-shirt for Bob some years ago that said, "Not so lean, not so mean, but still a Marine."
I've been wearing that. I lost some weight, so I've been wearing it now.
Bob mentioned we've been friends for a long time, and it's been my pleasure to have known him for all this time.
Well, thank you. Same here. We've had a lot of good times.
Well, we're glad you were able to talk to us here today.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
I talk too much anyway. Bob will tell you that.
No.
He's always telling me to shut up and listen.
Yeah, well.